So, I wanted to make this big joke about how Final Fantasy 15 had this really long development cycle by referring it to its original name, Final Fantasy Versus 13. I was going to be really excited, and then I'd pull out a piece of paper that was going to be a fake memo from Square-Enix and say, the name's changed, and I was going to be really mad about it. As you can tell from that description, it was really ridiculous, and it pushed this video back a month and a half as I tried to weave this thing into this intro, and it just didn't work. Things had to change, much like this game did over its 10-year development cycle. With the main game done, and the first bit of the DLC out of the way, and upcoming chapters coming soon, I instead decided to scrap that intro and kind of tell you why I decided to buy Final Fantasy 15 on a whim.
こうしろって？ったく、つい踊っちまった。
So after many changes, including system jumps, graphic engines, and even a directorial change, Final Fantasy XV finally graced our video game consoles back on November 29th, 2016. While it is considered a part of the Final Fantasy XIII setting, it's really only thematic, and none of the game relates to any of the events that happen in any of the Final Fantasy XIII games. You play as Noctis, or rather Prince Noctis Lucius Callum, pardon the pronunciation, and his three friends, Gladiolus, a personal bodyguard, Ignis, a sort of advisor and personal cook, and Prompto, a photographer who is really just a friend with no real standing within the royal court. The boys are being sent out to meet up with Noctis' fiancée, Lunafreya, whose marriage will not only result in a lot of celebrity, but also a peace accord with an empire outside of the kingdom. From here, everything sort of goes to hell as the Empire invades the kingdom, kills the king, also known as Noctis' father, and takes some sort of crystal that helps protect the area. But before this whole thing happens, our boys are spending time pushing a car that's broken down. Now, I have to say I didn't have a whole lot riding on this Final Fantasy. I mean, as I said, I bought it on a whim. I'm sure I was interested, but it wasn't one of those day one purchases for me. I was setting myself up to be extremely disappointed, and I was going to say that we have another mediocre main series Final Fantasy on our hands. And yet as I played through this game, it was clear to me that the decisions made during its lengthy development cycle were indeed the right ones. Square-Enix wanted to make sure that this game deserved to be a part of the main numbered franchise, and not some sort of excuse. And it seems like they've succeeded. The game starts up with a sort of promise to the player. If this is your first Final Fantasy, if you've been playing them all since the first game on the NES, or anywhere in between, you're in for a treat. Final Fantasy XV takes ideas from many different sources, runs them through a blender, and sieves out most of the crap in order to make an experience that really does feel like Final Fantasy. Well, at least for us old farts. Grizzled veterans. Yeah. I have to start with this world where your characters decided to have a car breakdown. While initially constrained so you can figure out how the game mechanics work, even this small area is actually fairly vast, and you'll have no problem running around and getting into mischief. To add to this feel of vastness, the car that you eventually fix is pretty much your chariot on this land. Sure, chocobos are in the game, and you can travel off-road with the chocobo without too much interference from the local wildlife. But if you really want to get somewhere fast, the Regalia is the way to go. It gives you this sense of freedom that I never expected any vehicle to have. You can also upgrade the car, and you'll want to because this thing has the fuel consumption of a hypercar without the speed. Fortunately, the upgrades to the fuel economy and the top speed aren't too hard to come by, and you'll soon be lost on these trips down the road. I should mention that you can fast travel to known spots for a little bit of gil, but then you lose out on the road trip feel. But seriously, 70 miles an hour? After all the upgrades? What is this, the 1950s? Well, then again, in this game you can apply some wax to the car and your fuel consumption will go way down. I wish that were a real thing, you know? Speaking of the world, when you actually get out of your car and explore, you'll find yourself in so many different types of areas. Deserts, forests, grasslands, beaches, mountains. Hell, you'll even climb up the passages of an inactive volcano. The dungeon areas are also varied, ranging from small mines to ice caves and even an old temple or two. Now, the last Final Fantasy game I actually beat was, coincidentally enough, 13, where the story had to be explained to you by what looked like essays in the subscreen menu. Thankfully, 15 is nowhere near as bad. Not only is the story easily digestible, but it's also quite good. I admit I'm a sucker for a story, even if it is bad. I watch professional wrestling, for crying out loud. But again, it's actually good. It's a band of brothers story where you see these four grow up in a time of extreme crisis, all while looking like a Japanese boy band. Okay, you can change the outfits, but everyone's been saying it, and in all honesty, they do look like a Japanese boy band. Hey, what do you expect from the guy that happened to design the characters from both Kingdom Hearts and the later Final Fantasy games? Since you have to look at your Japanese boy band for the next several hours, we have to see how they move and fight. I have to say I was surprised there was a jump button, which meant I was probably going to complain about the possible platforming. Fortunately, that's only constrained to one dungeon, and the rest of the movement is actually very responsive. Noctis will turn on a dime better than the best race car drifters that gush about Initial D, and the camera, while not the best, will still work. Combat flows well, and everything can be controlled via different button presses and a few unobtrusive menus. It's actually really funny how easy it is to heal oneself and party members with 2 or 3 button presses. This does mean that the combat doesn't have battle screens, but that's fine. All of the link strikes are easy to do, and button mashing actually kind of works, so you can work out your frustrations while killing enemies. Just make sure you're not screaming die, die, die while playing this game. Your neighbors will probably look at you funny in the morning. Yeah, I might be speaking from experience. Leveling up is actually brilliant and reminds me a lot of old-school D&D campaigns. You do gain experience and ability points when you defeat enemies, and that experience is tallied, but the only time you actually gain levels is when you actually go to sleep. This can be done at campgrounds for free, where you can experience the great outdoors, or you can spend a little money and take advantage of an experience multiplier. Camping has its advantages, as you can make your own meals and boost your stats for an entire day and night cycle. Now, about those ability points, I know that we all looked at the menus for those things and went, "Oh, great, it's the sphere grid again." And yes, it is the sphere grid, but at least it's only tied to abilities and not actual statistics. These abilities help you boost your link strikes, give you stronger spells when you craft them, and even make your stamina meter longer. The only part that seemed kind of useless to me is an area that is only effective when you use what they call a weight system. But I didn't mess around with that, as I found the normal combat just fine. You know, I could gush more about Final Fantasy 15, like, I don't know, how much I like the crafting system when it comes to magic, or how much I like the fact that there are hunts in there from other games and that you can use that to make a whole bunch of money outside of selling items. I even like the fact that they made little nods to the older Final Fantasies. For instance, the use of the term Magitech. A bunch of enemies use that term. As one personality used to say, steal from one person, it's plagiarism. Steal from a bunch of people, it's research. And Square-Enix definitely did their research for Final Fantasy 15. So how about the stuff we can trash?
While I do like the combat, I don't like the fact that you're only controlling one character. It's almost like 13 in a sense, where the supporting characters only help out with their link strikes and extra attacks. The AI party is still good, but I do wish they do more than just sit there and attack. They don't really heal themselves, and they don't go diving for the Phoenix Downs so they get taken down to 0 hit points. I really would have preferred a party system more like Final Fantasy XII, where you can control every character in the party. However, I think for what they were trying to do, they had to make a couple sacrifices in order to get the game out on time, and this was probably one of them. I also don't like some of the ways the dungeons are designed. I get it, dungeons are supposed to be hard, but you don't make the layouts confusing and therefore really easy to get lost. One of the dungeons has you walking around in a multi-level area just completely filled with enemies that surprise you out of nowhere. Thank goodness enemies don't respawn while you're in the dungeon, otherwise I'd be more frustrated trying to kill things while I'm looking for that one small ledge I'm supposed to shimmy across. Now there's one small nitpick I have to mention. This world definitely makes references to a lot of other games. I mentioned the whole Magitech thing and how they went back to 4 people in the party. However, there's this mention of this game called King's Night. It's something all 4 characters mention when they're wandering around or going to sleep. Sometimes they'll mention 5-star characters or playing in a versus mode of sorts.
But that's nothing as to what King's Night is like. You know how I know? Because I own King's Night. This is King's Night. And it looks like this. There's probably some pro YouTuber guy who's shaking in his boots about this.
And I do have to say that right around the end, the game falls a bit flat. Now, this is pretty well known, and in fact, Square-Enix is developing DLC to apparently fix Chapter 13 of the game. But I get the feeling that there was supposed to be more in some of the earlier chapters. The draw distances I saw from both Altezia, which is a completely waterlocked kingdom, as well as the area on the train that you stop off at for a bit, could have been fleshed out like the main area you drive in. I mean, they outright tell you that you have the car on the boat or the train. So it would make sense to have these areas to explore around, much like in the earlier chapters. Somehow I think this stuff ended up on the cutting room floor as well. Now, I didn't mind the semi-jump scare prone Chapter 13. In fact, I think it adds to the crazy atmosphere, even if I got a few more patches of gray on my head. However, they could have expanded those other areas a lot more.
You know, it's funny how I think that a world needs even more expansion. Well, now that I think about it, not really. Final Fantasy XIII's biggest complaint was how linear and constrained it was up to a certain point. But now that we're at the end, I'm finally going to ask the question you've all been waiting for. Is Final Fantasy XV worth your cash?
Final Fantasy XV retails for $60 in both physical and digital forms, with some small deviations here and there. Due to the current 30th anniversary of Final Fantasy, it's possible we could see some discounts. For instance, the Square-Enix store has it going for $40 at the moment, and I'm sure other retailers would also match that price. I got it for $35 on a whim when Amazon had it on sale for one day, and I haven't seen that price since. However, after going through everything, this game is worth $60. The story is good, the pacing doesn't get overbearing, the grinding isn't all that bad, and the whole world is so immersive that you'll get lost while you're driving around on the roads. Even without the Season Pass, there is more than enough content to justify the $60 price tag.
You know, I love surprises like this. When I first heard that Final Fantasy 15 was coming out, I intentionally kept myself away from all the news and reviews and playthroughs about the game. In fact, I saw maybe just a little bit of it on a stream at one point, but other than that, I really didn't see much, and honestly, keeping myself away from it made me a little jaded about it. Thank goodness I was pleasantly surprised. Final Fantasy 15 starts off where you see 4 guys pushing a car down a deserted road with Florence and the Machine covering Stand By Me of all songs. And it ends, well, I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, but let's just say all the decisions made during story development make perfect sense in the end. The promise that you see at startup of the game is a promise that Final Fantasy 15 keeps. Whether you're a newcomer or a veteran, this is a Final Fantasy for everyone. Thank you so much for watching this video that I've been wanting to get out for a month and a half. You know, I really was pleasantly surprised by this. I can't gush enough about it. Yeah, there are problems with it, but you know what? So does every other game. I did not think this was going to be a $60 game, and somehow it ended up as a $60 game. Who'd have thought? Anyway, thanks for watching. If you like the video, go ahead and click on that like button. Subscribe if you want to see anything else, and all my past stuff, of course. And if you want any updates, make sure you click that little bell, so that way you get all the updates for whenever I finally put out another video. Now, if time permits, I think I actually should start another video, which means I gotta play another game. How am I going to get rid of this comic book kick?